Hello, and thank you for tuning in to TEQ's International Market Briefing Sessions. My name's Kate Duffy, and I'm TEQ's Marketing Program Director and Hub Director for Australia and New Zealand. Today's briefing is focused on the New Zealand market, and in terms of the agenda, I'll start by providing a market update to give you a sense of the current lay of the land in New Zealand. I'll then move on to providing some consumer research insights on the market before finishing with detail on TEQ's reopening plans for New Zealand. So starting with a quick market update for you. Pre-COVID, Queensland welcomed 489,000 New Zealand visitors who stayed 4.7 million nights and spent 605 million in Queensland in 2019. New Zealand was our second largest market by expenditure and also in terms of holiday visitor arrivals. New Zealand has always been a very strong BFR market, with 46% of New Zealand arrivals having visited Queensland between 8 to 20 times previously. So this market knows Queensland very well. Just over 50% of Kiwi visitors are coming for a holiday, with an average length of stay in Queensland of 8 nights, with winter a peak travel period for New Zealanders who are keen to escape the cold and enjoy Queensland's warmer climate. Pre-COVID, New Zealand visitors were arriving in Queensland predominantly via Air New Zealand into the ports of Brisbane, Gold Coast, Cairns and the Sunshine Coast. As we emerge from the pandemic, we are incredibly excited to bring Kiwi travellers back to Queensland. New Zealand is our closest international market, and we see them as a big contributor to Queensland's international recovery. Taking a look now at aviation, this is what the current schedule looks like for flights between New Zealand and Queensland. We can see aviation has started to pick up, with the resumption of direct flights from all carriers expected over the next couple of months. We have services coming online from the key New Zealand gateways of Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington and Queenstown. Air New Zealand have set their schedule through until July, which will include its seasonal direct flights once again to the Sunshine Coast and Cairns. An additional capacity has also been put in place for April to Brisbane and the Gold Coast due to anticipated high demand, which is great. Virgin Australia will be the last to market at this stage, looking at November for flights to resume. So putting this schedule into context, in July 2019, there were 134,000 seats out of New Zealand into Queensland. And when we look at the current schedule for July 2022, we see the number sitting at 78,000 seats. So we're gradually heading towards this level again. So moving now on to distribution, and I have to just pause and call out my colleague Mandy Vale for sharing these insights with us. Mandy is our trade marketing program leader based in New Zealand. So whilst the New Zealand industry has suffered heavy losses with a large reduction in staffing numbers, New Zealand's distribution landscape remains relatively unscathed, with all our key partners still operating. Since New Zealand has relaxed its borders over the past month, the industry is now working through rapid growth in volume on as little as 25% of the pre-COVID workforce. One partner advised last week that they are already experiencing 80% of their sales volume of 2019. And the Travel Agents Association of New Zealand has recently reported the industry has gone from famine to feast in the space of a couple of weeks, with members reporting up to 90% total transaction value compared to pre-COVID days. All of this is driven by pent-up demand. Like most markets, resourcing is the biggest challenge in New Zealand currently, with a smaller workforce trying to deliver increasing sales growth. But what we are seeing is a resurgence of the travel advisor in New Zealand, as Kiwi travellers are turning to sources they trust who can help them with their travel plans if things need to change. Also, like many other markets, the pandemic has had an impact on the media landscape in New Zealand, acting as a catalyst and accelerating media transformation with a shift towards an increase in digital spend by advertisers. Post-COVID, advertisers have returned to investing in New Zealand media in a significant way. Audience supply, on the other hand, isn't growing, and in the case of channels like TV, is declining year on year. The key takeaway for what we're seeing in New Zealand is unprecedented market inflation across all media channels driven by demand. Having said that, audiences on broadcast video on demand platforms are continuing to increase as we see BVOD platforms attracting younger viewers that are harder to reach on linear TV. Like other international markets, we're also seeing very strong competition in New Zealand from other destinations. Starting with Fiji and the Cook Islands, both continue to have extensive marketing activity in New Zealand. We're expecting Hawaii to kick off advertising soon, with Air New Zealand and Hawaiian Airlines both restarting flights from July. New York has also been active in the market, with Air New Zealand announcing its direct flights will begin from September. And of course, we can't forget the other Australian DMOs who are active in New Zealand. These include Tasmania, South Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales. All of this competition will be an ongoing challenge for Queensland, which we will look to address through a strong share of voice in the market, together with a focus on conversion activity. So moving on now to the next section of the agenda, I'm keen to share some consumer research insights. Here is Tourism Australia's latest travel sentiment tracker, shared last week with the fieldwork conducted from the 16th to the 22nd of March 2022. These results reflect where New Zealand is currently at in moving through the impact of Omicron and as they start to lift restrictions across the country. We can see that consumer confidence is steady this wave. It's great to see travel intention for the next 6 months is well up this wave, with residents now able to travel and return to New Zealand without the need to self-isolate, which has been a major barrier to two-way travel. It's also heartening to see booking intention edging upwards this wave. Finally, in terms of perceptions of Australia, the news of the Omicron surge we experienced here in Australia over Christmas made headline news in New Zealand. And we can see Kiwis' perception of Australia as a safe destination over that period sharply declined. It's good to see this has recovered strongly this month, up to 66%. So after a bumpy period, things are beginning to look up out of New Zealand. Now, looking at the New Zealand market's attitudes towards their next holiday from the Travel Sentiment Tracker, we can see 39% of New Zealand respondents are thinking or dreaming about their next holiday, with 25% researching or actively planning their next holiday. 28% are considering visiting Australia in the next 1 to 2 years, while 21% are intending to visit Australia in the next 6 to 12 months. And finally, we can see VFR and holidays account for half the intention each, with 47% and 46% respectively, with VFR showing a steep climb this wave. And finally, VFR and holidays account for half the intention each, with 47% and 46% respectively, with VFR showing a steep climb this wave. This is a much, much more positive outlook that we're seeing now than we were when New Zealand first reopened to Queensland back in 2021. Moving now to TEQ's reopening plan. And I call this our re-entry plan for New Zealand, as we've had a couple of false starts getting back into this market. Whilst Kiwis have been able to travel between Australia and New Zealand without the need to self-isolate since early March, we now know with certainty from the New Zealand government that Australian citizens will also be able to travel between Australia and New Zealand from the 13th of April, the final piece in the puzzle for free-flowing two-way travel. Then we know Australia will no longer require pre-departure testing for vaccinated inbound travellers from the 17th of April, which will remove another friction for Kiwis coming to Australia. TEQ's plan to enter the market will kick off with a retail focus aligned to that mid-April timeframe, before we then come in with our aspirational Queensland brand activity from late May, designed to drive winter bookings into Queensland out of New Zealand. And when we think about what we need to communicate in New Zealand as we re-enter the market, so we saw in the earlier travel sentiment slides that it's very important that New Zealand consumers feel safe to travel to Australia. So first and foremost, we need to convey that Queensland is open and safe. We also know that, like the domestic market, Kiwis have long held perceptions on what Queensland has to offer as a travel destination. So as we re-enter the market, we need to show Kiwis that there's more to Queensland than they might know. We're also aware that Kiwis love to take one flight to their destination. So it's a big competitive advantage for Queensland that we have 4 international airports, all with direct flights to and from New Zealand. We would highlight this through our activity and spotlight the increased accessibility we have into Queensland by air from New Zealand. And lastly, we know New Zealand is a very price-driven market. So a key component to our activity is pushing strong tactical messaging and showing that there are great Queensland deals on sale. So you can see here a snapshot of TEQ's marketing calendar for the quarter ahead, and we have a lot of activity locked in for Q4, which is fantastic. So we're going to kick off by partnering with Air New Zealand as the first STO campaign in New Zealand since the border opened on the 28th of February. The focus of this activity is to stimulate and convert demand on Air New Zealand's direct services to Queensland's 4 gateways: Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast and Cairns. Next up is My Queensland, as we plan to support their brand launch into New Zealand. This partnership will open up a brand new Queensland-only channel, which will support the long-term recovery and growth of the New Zealand market. It will allow us to deliver new experiences to market, reposition Queensland, and deliver dispersal and repeat visitation. We're also working with trusted partner House of Travel to promote value packages targeting couples 45 plus and younger families, as well as Travel Associates, where we will focus on Queensland's barefoot luxury global subsegment. So once we've entered the market with this strong tactical focus, we will then launch our aspirational brand campaign, Days Like This. We'll launch Days Like This in late May, with activity running through until the end of June. The campaign is timed to drive winter bookings out of New Zealand to Queensland. The Days Like This campaign is all about highlighting those special moments we have when we're on holiday that make a holiday memorable. It's the simple pleasures of reconnecting with friends and family that we know New Zealand travellers are craving post-pandemic. Our media approach for the first 2 weeks of the campaign we're calling Light Up the Room. As the phrase implies, we plan to launch with a big bang, taking a heavy screens approach with channels including TV, broadcast video on demand, cinema, YouTube, and social media, before we then shift into the next phase of our media strategy, which we're calling Brand Plus Tactical, where we will start to bring in more conversion-focused messaging. Here we will introduce media channels including radio and digital display. In order for the whole of industry to leverage the work we're doing from a brand perspective, there needs to be a united approach to our marketing activity in New Zealand. The goal is to maximise all marketing investment from Queensland tourism businesses to increase consideration for Queensland as a destination and ensure we're effectively moving Kiwis through the path to purchasing a Queensland holiday. And as we do in the domestic market, industry can connect with iMate, the industry media agency for tourism and events, to learn about all the different ways you can leverage TEQ's marketing activity in New Zealand. We'd love to see our RTO and industry operator partners aligned to TEQ's Days Like This campaign through key marketing placements via iMate. You can do things like leverage TEQ's audience data to reach qualified travel intenders in New Zealand. If you're interested in the New Zealand market and you want to learn more about our plans and how you can get involved with both no-cost and low-cost opportunities, please reach out to the team at iMate on hello@imate.queensland.com. In terms of TEQ's earned media approach in New Zealand, we have enhanced our PR presence in the market. And with two-way quarantine-free travel between Australia and New Zealand announced, we're seeing a strong appetite for travel features and an opportunity to capitalise on the New Zealand media's interest. Our team is focused on reigniting and strengthening our relationships with top-tier media partners across the ditch. Now that borders are open, we will drive consideration for Queensland by delivering incremental media for Mills, and we're also very keen to explore broadcast TV opportunities out of New Zealand. And finally, of course, our ongoing press office activity. This is the day-to-day pitching of editorial content aligned to emerging media trends to ensure a dominant share of voice for Queensland in the market. As I mentioned in the market update section earlier, New Zealand trade industry are currently focused on rebuilding and recruiting. TEQ recognised the need for industry to get back on their feet and the time this will take, and for this reason TEQ's in-market engagement, including trade for Mills and roadshows, will be focused on the back half of this calendar year. However, we still have plans in place to support the trade in the short term through activity including training, trade media activity and trade incentive activity. So that's the end of our New Zealand market update. For those that have made it to the end, thank you for watching all the way through. I look forward to discussing all things New Zealand at the follow-up Q&A session. Thank you again.